Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot and a member of the PMDG 737 tech team. In today's video, let's have a look at the depressurization in flight in the PMDG Boeing 737. Now this is often known as rapid depressurization or rapid decompression, however there are several scenarios of how this could play out. And in fact, in the real world, what happens most of the time is that you actually get a slow decompression because of a failure in the pressurization system. It is very, very rare that, for example, a window blows out or a part of the fuselage rips off, even though there are, of course, some rather spectacular cases. Think about the Aloha 737, but it is very, very rare that something like that happens. And for this reason, the memory items are split into two different memory items for this condition. The first one is the cabin altitude warning or rapid depressurization memory items, and those focus on establishing whether an emergency descent is needed or fixing the condition in the first place. So, at any time when the cabin altitude warning sounds, the first step is always to take on the oxygen masks and set the regulators to 100%. Now, take the mask, put it on. The second step is to establish crew communications, which is done through the audio control panel down here. So normally we would have the radio, telephony or interphone switch sticky on the intercom position so that you can simply talk to your colleague without having to press any buttons for it. Now, when you're wearing the mask, you want to switch this one into the middle position, and you need to switch the selector from the boom mic, which is your headset mic, to the oxygen mask. I would also recommend to then select the flight interphone and use the RT switch to transmit on there. If your airplane is fitted with a switch to communicate over the interphone right on your control column, which would be back here, so there is an option for the 737 to either simply have a push-to-talk switch to ATC up here, but the lower side of the switch can also be used as interphone switch if that option is installed. Small hint, the PMDG 737 always has that option. So when you've got that, then you do not need to select flight interphone, but that way you can communicate with your colleague without always blowing your ears away due to the breathing noises from the oxygen mask. Now that's the first and most important step. The second step is to sit back, relax a little bit, and then go into the further procedure. Now the cabin altitude or rapid depressurization memory items will next tell you to switch the pressurization mode selector into the manual mode, and then we're going to completely close the outflow valve by holding the outflow valve switch into the closed position. And this is done so that in case that there may have been any problem with the pressurization system earlier, the outflow valve would now be completely shut, and therefore the cabin altitude is forced to be climbing again. Now, that's going to be for later, when we actually demonstrate this happening. If it is determined that the cabin altitude is uncontrollable, so if the outflow valve is fully closed and the cabin altitude is still climbing, then switch the passenger signs on, passenger oxygen system on, and then we go into the emergency descent memory items. Now the emergency descent memory items are rather easy. The pilot flying will advise the cabin crew on the PA system of an impending rapid descent, which is normally done by making a PA and just calling emergency descent, emergency descent. Verify that the passenger signs are on, and then without delay descend to the lowest safe altitude or 10,000 feet, whichever is higher. Now for that we initially just take the altitude down, hit level change, fly 45 degrees off course so that you do not crash into anybody flying below you on the same airway, and go to heading select, and then decide what you're going to do with your airspeed. So the airspeed should be targeted to VMO MMO with a little bit of maneuver margin normally. However, if structural integrity of the airplane is in doubt, so if you, for example, a part might have broken off the aircraft, then limit the speed as much as possible and avoid high maneuvering loads. And that is everything there is to the emergency descent memory items. Now, once we are descending, the pilot monitoring would start reading the checklist, which would tell you to turn the engine start switches into continuous. Okay, we'll leave it at that. The important point once you are in the emergency descent is that you are going to request the local QNH from air traffic control and determine the minimum safe altitude, which can easiest be done over the en route chart. So if you simply zoom in a little bit over here, you can see we got minimum safe altitude of 2,300 here, 2,700 in the grid over here, so that you do not crash into any mountains while you're on the emergency descent. Well, that's everything there is to these procedures. Now, let's go ahead and put this to practice by actually executing an emergency descent. Now, the failure can be triggered down here in the FMC when you go to Menu, PMDG Setup, Aircraft Failures, and then we are going to search for the Rapid Decompression, which I do think is under Miscellaneous in the PMDG, but you can see I gotta search for this a little bit myself. Nope, down here's the tail strike, but not the decompression. So let's go ahead and find the decompression. Probably going to be under pressurization. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So, pressure, hull integrity, that's basically your window blowing off, or a door blowing off, or something like that. So let's go ahead and arm that. We are going to give it 5 seconds until it happens. And then we can get right into the procedure. So I'm going to execute this. Now, let's just take a seat here. We're sitting here. We are probably preparing for the normal flight. And this is the cabin altitude warning that's coming on over here. So, the moment you hear this, oxygen mask on, establish crew communication. So, interphone goes off, select that to mask. And the same should also be the case for your colleague. Okay, can you hear me? Yes? Perfect. Okay. Rapid depressurization memory items. Associated with cabin altitude warning light, we've got that. So, don oxygen mask and set regulators to 100%. Establish crew communications. Now, as part of establishing crew communications, I do recommend just to hit the altitude horn cutout button so that it gets silent again. Okay, over here we can confirm the cabin altitude is up at 35,000 feet as well. Differential pressure is close to 0. So, okay, makes sense. We do indeed have a rapid depressurization. Pressurization mode selector, manual. That's manual. Outflow valve switch, hold and close until the outflow valve indication shows fully closed. We're going to hold this over here, and even if the valve already shows fully closed, always hold it for a couple more seconds. Okay, now it is showing fully closed. Cabin altitude, nothing happens. Now the cabin shows us descending over here, which is good, but taking much too long, and honestly, there is no differential pressure building. Okay, we definitely got a rapid depressurization. So, now we need to determine, is the cabin altitude uncontrollable, yes or no? We can see there is absolutely no change over here, even though this kind of goes into the correct direction, but this is showing us something that's not happening up here. So, in this case, we are going to determine the cabin altitude is uncontrollable, so let's continue with the procedure. And that's going to be passenger signs on, passenger oxygen switch on. And that's aft here. So, passenger oxygen switch, even if it already shows that they have triggered automatically, nonetheless, put it to on, and then you can release it, and that's all your masks deployed. So, go to the emergency descent memory items. Emergency descent, emergency descent. First thing, just set the altitude down a bit, press level change. Now, turn 45 degrees off route, heading select, speed, what are we going to do? Well, thrust levers idle, speed brake out. So what are we going to do with the speed? We had a rapid decompression. That means chances are the structural integrity of the aircraft could be in doubt. So let's limit the speed as much as reasonably possible. Gonna go up to 7.9 here. If we start hearing any strange noises or anything, then we are going to limit the speed further. So, passenger signs are on, engine start switch is on, and it is considered good practice also to turn the light on so that you are as visible as possible. Now, while the pilot flying is controlling the descent, the pilot monitoring would now make a mayday call to ATC. And before we get to that, quick point, as soon as you're actually established within the descent, set the altitude down to 10,000, refine the heading if needed. We're already on 45 degrees, that's okay. So, next, the pilot monitoring has to do a little bit of work. The first of them is going to be air traffic control. Mayday, 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 Ryanair 4 Tango Whiskey, rapid depressurization descending to flight level 100, request QNH. Okay, ATC is now going to come up with your QNH. Let's say that is 1013, we simply set this. Doesn't matter if you are, doesn't matter if you get the warning down here, you are going down to an altitude, not a flight level. Okay, so, going through 30,000, always a good idea to select the angle of bank back to 25 so that the airplane has full maneuvering capability, especially if ATC wants to vector you away from an aircraft. Next, we are going to check the minimum safe altitude. So, let's go down into the en route chart, zoom in a little bit. Let's look into the direction of our flight. 5,200, 4,200. Okay, so 6,000 keeps us safe. Personal recommendation here, descend to a little bit lower than 10,000 so that breathing is easier there. Especially if your colleague is smoking, 10,000 may still cause some effects of oxygen deprivation. So personally, I would always do something like going down to 8,000 feet over here, just so that you got a little bit of margin. Okay, so we've got that. Speed is up at 330 knots. Let's not overspeed the airplane. I'm not going to go to 340 over here. And like that, we are now descending. Okay. So, since the memory items are now completed, we can go into the emergency descent non-normal checklist. And we can absolutely do that while we are descending. So, with the memory items complete, the next parts of the checklist are going to be when approaching the level of altitude, smoothly lower the speed brake lever to the down detent and level off. Add thrust and stabilize on altitude and airspeed. So, general rule of thumb, when you got 2,000 feet to go to the target altitude, stow the speed brake slowly so that you don't overspeed the aircraft. At 1,000 feet to go, select vertical speed minus 1,000 to level the airplane off. That's a good idea of stuff to do while you are conducting the emergency descent. So, crew oxygen regulators normal. Flight crew must use oxygen when cabin altitude is above 10,000 feet to conserve oxygen if required, for example, because you cannot level off at 10,000. Let's say if you were flying over mountains, you have to level off earlier. Then set the crew oxygen regulator, that's the one on your mask down here, into the normal position, which is going to give you a mixture between oxygen from the system and ambient cabin air, so that you have more oxygen available, or rather oxygen available for longer. Engine start switches continuous, and according to the QRH, the new course of action is based on weather, oxygen, fuel remaining and available airports. Use of long-range cruise may be needed. Note, to avoid landing with the cabin pressurized, if the pressurization mode selector is in manual, refer to the AFCOM supplementary procedures manual mode operation for further guidance on how to manage cabin pressurization. Choose one. Pressurization mode selector is in manual, or pressurization mode selector is not in manual. It is in manual because that is what we have determined to need earlier during the memory items. Okay, so go to step 13 in the checklist, which is checklist complete except deferred items, and the deferred items are going to change the descent checklist slightly, where it now says pressurization move to open or close as needed to control pressurization. That's the outflow valve over here, so operate it manually in order to keep the cabin altitude under control. Remember, the aircraft may not necessarily have decompressed because of something blowing out, but it might as well have been a system malfunction. So in that case, you may have to control the pressurization system manually in order to achieve a proper cabin altitude and cabin descent as you're landing the aircraft. Now we got 2,000 to go, so let's stow the speed brakes. We're approaching 1,000 to go. Vertical speed, minus 1,000. And now we can also tune the speed down towards 250 knots already. That is going to make it quite a bit quieter inside the cabin, especially if there is a part missing, so that, you know, you're not blowing your ears away. Well, and as we are now about to reach flight level 100, we can start getting off the oxygen. Now, for this, very important, always have the pilot monitoring come off oxygen first, and only once the cabin altitude is below 10,000 feet. Not just your aircraft altitude, but also the cabin altitude up here. Now, once you are, the cabin altitude warning light is going to go out as well, so that you can then safely get off oxygen. Now, how are you going to do that? Let's go over it. So, first things first, the pilot monitoring is going to get off the oxygen mask. For this, number one, ensure that you do not have a constant transmission enabled on your intercom. If that is your selection, your colleague will thank you. Their eardrum is very likely going to rupture from the noises you're going to cause. So, get the oxygen mask off, put your headset on, reconfigure your audio control panel, so the microphone selector back to the boom mic, and then you can turn on the sticky interphone. And when that is done, then you can change controls, so the pilot monitoring, or the prior pilot monitoring, can now become pilot flying, and now you are going to get off oxygen as well. So mask selected boom, interphone can become sticky again, put the headset on, and now decide on the further course of action. Now, that's about everything there is to it related to the memory items themselves. From here on, you are simply going to do a normal diversion, so have a look into my diversion tutorial, or you might even be able to continue to the destination airport, if that one has been close by. FMC data may or may not be reliable, so it may of course be easy just to say, okay, we're in 8,000, so let me type that in here, new cruise altitude 8,000. Okay, what's my fuel going to be at the destination? FMC says I can make it beautiful. No, that's not going to work. And that is not going to work for a very simple reason. Your FMC calculates with standard figures, but your airplane may be damaged. There may be parts missing on the outside. So be a little careful there, and always check with your actual fuel usage. So my recommendation here, have a look at the fuel flow down here. Once you are level and at speed, check the fuel flow, calculate how much you're really going to need to get to your destination, and then make a decision whether a diversion is necessary or not. There is a good chance that a diversion might become necessary anyway, because passengers and cabin crew may get injured during a procedure like this. Just think about a rapid decompression happening, all the air rushes out of the hole, that is going to drag along anything that might have gotten loose in the cabin. So chances are people may get hit by things. So chances are you might have injured passengers. So a diversion is rather likely like this. Well, and that's everything there is to this. Thank you very much for watching. As always, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to see you all again on the next one.